Never mind what's going on in Washington, we have revenue and spending issues right here in Arizona.
With the budget carry forward, that means that you have some money that people say, well, gee, that's unallocated. It is allocated. It's allocated for out years, but people will want to spend a lot of that money in 14.
What are we going to do to make sure to fill in some of those big, deep holes that have been, dug in our various agencies in order for them to at least come up to just basic levels of, inflation rates.
Tonight on Arizona Week, a briefing on the 2013 legislative session and the expected wrangle over state spending.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
Unlike the federal fiscal picture, Arizona's state budget is balanced. In fact, state tax revenues in the last 18 months have outpaced spending by upwards of $1 billion. The legislative session will begin in 10 days, and the big question is the state fiscally sound enough to restore cuts to education, health care, and other critical needs? Here's what 2 Senate leaders and 2 journalists had to say. Arizona Senate President Andy Biggs, thanks for speaking with me.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good to see you again.
The big issue in the coming session will, of course, be the budget. Talk a little bit about what you see happening with that.
Well, what we face in the budget, we face a number of things. We're doing 3-year budgeting now, which I think is a marvelous move. And we know that in 16 we have some holes to fill because the ACA will be fully implemented by that time. So we have to make some adjustments for that.
ACA, the Affordable Care Act.
That is correct, yes. And so we're looking at that, but we have some other issues that will impact us with the budget this year. Things such as, do we do the Medicaid expansion for Prop 204 population or not? What impact would that have? And as you know, we recently received guidance from the federal government that they're not going to give Arizona the enhanced match rate, which means that it will cost us more were we to expand Medicaid population.
To the 100% mark.
Right, to the 100% mark. That's exactly right. And so we have that issue that will definitely affect the budget. Because we made some plans for the 15 and 16 fall-offs, we have budget carry forwards. And with the budget carry forward, that means that you have some money that people say, well, gee, that's unallocated. It is allocated. It's allocated for out years, but people will want to spend a lot of that money in 14. So you're going to have that tug of war that normally goes on when people want to spend. Others are saying, well, let's wait. We've got some issues ahead. So you'll see those tug of wars.
Let's talk a bit about how one of those tug of wars might go. We'll come back to Medicaid in a minute, but first, education. There will be pressure, we assume, with the expiration of the temporary sales tax for the legislature to look at a way to add some money in on education. Do you think that will happen?
If you're asking, is there pressure? Yeah, there will be some pressure there to find different avenues to fund education. Absolutely.
And how do you respond to that at this point? Is it too soon to say because you don't really know what you're going to be facing?
I think it's really too early to say how much money we can put there. I would imagine that you're going to see some money go there. How will we do it? Last year we added $50-some-odd million. We put it in a structured accountability program so we could focus on some areas that we really are concerned with, like K-3 reading programs. We wanted accountability. That tends to be where people want to go is, yeah, let's give more money, but let's see if we can direct it to a specific need. Let's see if we can get some accountability measures tied to that funding.
Well, and in that regard, the governor is pushing her education reform measures over the course of her term. And some of those measures require some spending. For example, the K-3 reading program. But teacher accountability and school improvement also require more funding, is at least what the advocates say, and even the governor says that. Do those get funded this year, or is that a long-term thing?
You know, we're looking at that. I think there's some things that we need to look at. Arizona has one of the most Byzantine K-12 funding programs where you have all kinds of little pots of funding that go here and there, and it actually can bind the districts or prevent them from using that money to its fullest sometimes. It also prevents, in some instances, that money from getting to the classroom, which is what we're always talking about. How do you get classroom dollars? How do you get teachers' salaries? How do you get the equipment and the supplies that we need in the classroom? So I know that there are efforts underway to look at how we might maybe restructure some of the funding, some of this funding model that we have in Arizona. So that's one thing. The other part of your question is actually how much money and if they're getting to that. And I think it's just too early to say. We're 6-7 months away from the start of the next fiscal year. We are trying to determine which way are we even trending as far as state revenue. In the last little bit, we've been actually flat or slightly down. So we want to see what that's going to be like at the end of 13, how much is going to actually be carrying forward before we start making those commitments.
Now back to Medicaid, which you talked about a little bit, and the federal decision that Arizona cannot make whole again the childless adults who are at 100% of poverty at the 85% rate, which is allowed under the Affordable Care Act. If you go to the 133% of, a lot of numbers here that might be confusing, but that go the 133% of the federal poverty rate that the Affordable Care Act will allow states to cover. Again, very early in the process, but what's your thinking at this point about that?
Well, obviously I'm speaking for myself on most of these things because you work with the caucus and the body and have to take that into account. So my perspective on this is the following. We know that if you go 133 federal poverty level, that's about a $150 million hit to the state general fund. If we would have gotten 100% level and got the enhanced match rate, that would have been about a $150 million hit. If we go to 100%, and because we're not going to get the enhanced rate, that means the hit to the general fund is about $415 million. So you have a difference of about $265 million there. That's enormous in a budget the size of ours with the constraints we already have on the general fund. So I think that's one of the reasons it's going to be a huge issue is now you can't really say, oh, well, the feds are going to give us this enhanced match rate so we can go ahead and start bringing on people and we can maybe absorb some of that. What you're saying now is you're almost having to pit, if it's $200 and some odd million there, you're almost having to pit it against, well, do we end up cutting into K-12 education by doing that? What we can do for education or any other program, for instance.
Democrats see it differently. Here's State Senate Minority Leader Leah Landrum Taylor. The top issue in the January session will be the budget?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely our budget and what we're going to do to make sure that we're taking care of some critical areas. Certainly, I know to my caucus and individuals around this state as it relates to education and the deep cuts that we've had in education over the last few years, and it's going to necessitate that we do something to help out with what's going on with evening out the playing field in the arena of education. Also, we have the big discussion as it relates to healthcare and the whole crisis that's going to go on with that. Even what's going to be happening with our patients people that are on access, our consumers that are on access. What direction are we going to go with that? And it's going to truly necessitate that we come up with a plan, or we're going to have thousands of people that will be without health care. And that's just something to me that is completely unacceptable, those that are not able to afford health care. And it's our responsibility to make sure that people have things like their education, their health and welfare and public safety. Those should be things that we should naturally want to protect.
Now, the Democrats will have a stronger caucus, a bigger caucus this time round with 4 added members. So the Republican majority, still a majority, but smaller. Do you expect to be able to have more influence?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the numbers, having now 13 members of our caucus, it makes a tremendous difference. I was here when we had 9, and we saw that it was more of a race for the pennant and trying to get our issues and our points out there when we had 9. But now that we have 13, it really puts a situation where we could work together and have an opportunity to sit at the table and truly come up with ideas in a bipartisan fashion and a way. And I think that's something that, the general public wants. They spoke to that in our last election. We were able to gain 4 seats. So it's evident that it's time to have more of a respectful nature here in our legislative body and to be able to work together.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the details of the budget. First of all, revenues are running ahead of projections slightly. There has been some softening over the last couple of months as reported by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, but they are running ahead of projections. Do you expect to see the legislature make any adjustments in spending before the end of the fiscal year?
One of the things, quite frankly, and it's very early when you're talking about the details of a budget, we know that, but at the same time, you have to have the whole picture in order to see which direction you're going in. I'm pleased to see that, our numbers are a little higher than what had been predicted, but at the same time, what's going to happen with that surplus that is there? Some may view it as a surplus. Some of us may look at it as, what are we going to do with the various deep cuts that have happened throughout the last fiscal cycles, the fiscal budget cycle? So with that being the case, we know that CPS has a big need in order to make sure that there's revenue coming back to CPS so that we can, have more caseworkers that are out there. Again, we're talking about, over like $7 billion that has been taken out of education over the last few years. These are things that, what are we going to do to make sure to fill in some of those big, deep holes that have been, dug in our various agencies in order for them to at least come up to just basic levels of, the inflation rates. We've got to, look at that, but we also have to look at getting them matched up to just numbers back from 2010, to even out and try to, move in a direction to help us out fiscally. So looking at that entire picture of where some of the revenues that we can, work with, we got to know what we're working with. Clearly, we're going to have that before we have the details of the budget going forward. Once we know what those concrete figures are, then we can make some good sound decisions of how that is going to be spent and taken care of.
Some Republicans are already talking about a status quo budget, again, just as an idea, because of the soft economy as it continues. Do you see that playing out, and what would happen specifically to education spending under such a scenario?
You know what, when you're looking at a status quo, quite frankly, we have done some, again, significant cuts over the last years, and it's hurt. We've gotten all the way down to the bone where we've cut. With that being the case, we cannot continue to go in that direction. I see where, for instance, with elimination of soft capital and budget cycles before, where we're not having, classrooms are not going to have what they need in order to conduct the business of properly educating our children, getting them prepared for the future. Quite frankly, I don't really see how the business community could even want this to be the case. If we're having a situation of wanting to increase our businesses, wanting to have businesses to stay here in our state and new businesses to be attracted, we're going to have to increase our education pool. Our brain trust is going, that is going to have to be the case. The cuts that have been taking place in universities, the cuts that have been taking place from elementary on, P20. This is not the time to work with the status quo and keep things the same.
In the realm of healthcare, do you see the governor's decision not to set up a state insurance exchange as allowed for under the Affordable Care Act a portend of what might happen with the Medicaid extension?
With the whole Medicaid expansion, again, when I see what happened with the exchange and then the Medicaid expansion. To me, it's apples and oranges. The Medicaid expansion, that's a whole different scenario. So you have to look at each thing one thing at a time. Now, with the Medicaid expansion, we have to do that. That is, to me, that is just something I feel is extremely necessary. We're talking about getting those individuals that have no access and no other way of getting health care. So we're talking about the medically needy. With that being the case, the discussion needs to start now. We really have to start this discussion. It should have happened yesterday as far as what we are going to be doing regarding serving those populations. We can no longer continue with the childless adult population, those that have chronic illnesses or will get chronic illnesses if they do not get the preventative care going forward.
How will it play out, and how will the still strong but less dominant Republican majority hold up? For analysis, I spoke with legislative reporters Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic and Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times. Mary Jo, new dynamic in the state legislature, shift in the numbers, Republicans still in majority but smaller. What difference will that make?
It's widely believed that the difference with a smaller number of Republicans compared to Democrats, that you will have perhaps more room in the middle for compromise and some kind of bipartisan work. I'm not sure that that will work. The Senate will be 17 Republicans, 13 Democrats. The House, 36 Republicans and 24 Democrats. If you need 16 and 31 to pass a bill, you can do the math and figure out what it would take to have the minority be an influence. But certainly the Democrats feel somewhat emboldened by the election results and feel that they will make a bigger difference in the next session of the legislature.
Are you hearing that same thing, Luigi? Democrats feel like they can get some things done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the prevailing sentiment by Democrats, and I think many at the Capitol, is that because of the narrower partisan split in both houses, that the Republicans will be impelled to reach out to Democrats to get the votes, and we'll find out if they actually will negotiate with the Democrats, for example, when it comes to drafting the state budget. But certainly, a lot of people are optimistic on the Democratic side that the Republicans will reach out to them.
Yeah, it will be interesting because as we leave the era of the supermajority, the last 2 years have been supermajority controlled by the Republicans. What we saw was that even though they didn't need all those Republican votes to pass things, all the Republicans generally voted together, because to break with your caucus makes you an outlier, might have made you vulnerable to a challenge in the primary election. So you almost got more of a herd instinct. With narrower margins, there is more opportunity for a couple of Republicans who might have specific demands to break away and threaten to make a coalition with the Democrats. So that's why I think people are looking at this as a very interesting upcoming dynamic.
What sorts of things might that occur on, Luigi? What kinds of issues might there be Republicans bleed over to the Democratic side?
Well, certainly the education budget, I think, is the one thing that many Republicans say they would like to see some increase in there. I think we've heard even the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee said, yeah, that's one thing I will consider, meaning more funding for the K-12 schools. So, and certainly have folks like Senator Rich Crandall and Senator Kimberly Yee, and they're very strong in their advocacy for more funding for public schools. And so if you look at a 17-13 split, you would only need 2 Republicans to sort of go over, cross the line, if you will, and vote with the Democrats in order for legislation not to go forward. So they can certainly hold that as a bargaining chip, if you will. We will find out if that actually happens, but the narrower split makes that possible.
On the House side, though, it's not just a couple of numbers, it's a half a dozen or more. Can that happen there on anything?
Much less likely, given the makeup of the House. I don't see that happening much. They might surprise us, but Speaker Tobin has been able to, in the last year, he's kept a very diverse coalition of Republicans together on things, and he will be attempting to repeat that this time.
Has there been any outreach by House Speaker Tobin to the Democrats the way Senate President-elect Biggs did with the minority leader, Senator Landrum Taylor? Any of that?
Not that I'm aware of. And I just saw Minority Leader Chad Campbell the other day, and there was no indication that there had been any kind of talks, at least at this point, other than to figure out who's going to be in what office.
Now, in the Senate, they are talking across the aisle. What do you think will come of that? More bipartisanship, or is that a protective measure by the Republicans to try to hold their issues in place?
I think all of those elements come into play. I mean, the difficulty, the challenge for Senator Biggs is trying to keep his caucus together. And that means, whereas before when you have a supermajority, he could afford to lose, a few votes and didn't really have to, the Senate president at the time didn't really have to court them, if you will. But now Mr. Biggs would have to ensure that every one of those Republicans would be on his side, be voting with him, voting with the leadership. So I think at the forefront, the challenge for him is to go out there, make sure that he's communicating with them, cooperating them, getting their whatever they need, getting those met. And that would be the way for him to ensure that his caucus is kept intact, if you will. But then, of course, as we know, the Republican Party is always fractious, if you will. There are different factions, even with 13 members. There are senators who have, or even House members who have different views on things, and so it's very likely that those senators could be voting with Democrats on certain issues. It just really depends on what the subject is.
And one person, Mary Jo, pointed out that the vote for Senate President was 9-8, so they're already split, right?
Right. The Republicans are already split, and as Luigi noted, the Democrats are too. I understand that their vote was 7-6. Yeah, I can't do my math fast enough. So you have two very divided caucuses. I don't know if a leadership vote portends disharmony going forward, but it gives us something to watch for.
We talked a little about education and what might happen there. Let's talk about one of the other big issues on the table, and that will be Medicaid or access funding. Luigi, what are you seeing on that, and can the Republicans be cracked, first of all, from whatever the governor suggests she wants to do with expanding Medicaid?
The governor is certainly the person that will have to take a lead on this one. And whatever the governor decides to do, and she hasn't really decided what she wants to do, will sort of be the basis of the conversation. The thing is that this week the Federal Health Department came out with a rule and essentially said, we're not, for those states that do not expand their Medicaid population up to 133% of the poverty level, which is the requirement of the Affordable Care Act, for states that do not do that, then they're not going to get the full match or the full enhanced match. If we did the 133% expansion, I think we're going to get an 85% match from the federal government instead of the usual 66%. Now that's a big part. That's a key to this debate, because that means that we're getting a lot more money if we did the full expansion. But then many people are not really talking about doing the 133%. I think most policymakers are just talking about or discussing restoring what we call the Prop 204 population. And this is the population that we used to cover, we used to pay for their insurance and their health care, and we decided to freeze their enrollment into Medicaid because we didn't have funds last year.
And that's the Prop 204 from the year 2000, not the Prop 204 from this year, correct? The tobacco tax money.
That is correct. And so since the federal government said we're not going to give you an enhanced match if you don't do it our way, I think that's going to weigh into whatever the governor decides to do. And she may decide not to restore the Prop 204 population as a result of the federal government sort of withholding the funds from the state.
And your insight on that, Mary Jo?
Well, I think that with the federal government having made it pretty clear how much they're going to pay in terms of a match, that makes it much easier an easier path for policymakers here. Early on, it was widely believed in the medical community that the governor would only go up to 100% of poverty level anyway, because anything above that, it does require more money, even though if you put more state money out, you're going to get a much more generous federal match. I think this will make it a lot easier to just hold the line at 100%. It will also probably forestall or avoid a battle with the legislature, which is rather averse to the idea of any kind of increases. It's widely believed that's why the governor didn't opt to have a state-run health exchange. That was just going to set her up for a big fight with the Republican leadership in the legislature, and maybe she was keeping her powder dry for the Medicaid decision.
Do we expect to see the governor's Medicaid proposal in her budget, Luigi?
We expect to see that. The governor will roll out her budget in January, I think just before the start of the legislative session. We expect to see what she wants to do with the healthcare issue, whether she wants to expand Medicaid up to 100% or up to 133%. The latter is very unlikely now. And we may not even see the governor push for the expansion of the Prop 204 population, or I'm sorry, the restoration of the Proposition 204 population, since we're not going to get any enhanced match from the feds, even if we did that.
And the dynamics that are playing here is that you have the temporary penny sales tax expires at the end of this current fiscal year. So lawmakers have said, look, we just aren't going to, they've got money in reserve, but not enough to spend a lot more on education, plus spend a lot more on healthcare, plus spend more on CPS, which we haven't even talked about, but that's been a priority of the governor. There's a crying need for help on child safety, and key lawmakers have signaled that child safety is something that they will consider spending increases on. So you're going to have these, at least those three key areas, sort of all in the mosh pit for some of the extra money that the state might have.
And then the one other issue that always seems to come to the fore in Arizona, immigration and new immigration laws, tougher immigration laws. Senator-elect Bob Worsley told us that he specifically was recruited for and elected to the Senate to put a damper on more immigration reform in Arizona, or more immigration law in Arizona. Luigi, will anything come to the fore in 2013?
There's this prevailing sentiment, I think, at the state legislature that this is something that needs a more comprehensive approach. And what I mean by that is that most people would say this is something that the feds really have to weigh in, and Arizona has done what it could. We have 1070. It remains very popular, and that's still in place.
Longer versions of all of tonight's interviews can be seen on our website, azweek.com. That's our program for Friday, January 4th, 2013. Next Friday, we plan to look at implications of the federal fiscal issues for Arizona. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.